Good morning. ORDA. It's the very first time in our history where a feature set, and not a product, got its own name. The very first time, and I think this might show you how important it is. The feature set is so huge that the MasterClass following this keynote, given by Laurent Ribardière, is only about ORDA. It's the first time to have a MasterClass as part of a summit, a session taking all slots in parallel. I give you here a quick overview about what it is and the main benefits. And Laurent will show much more. He will give you ideas what you can do with it and the vision he had in mind when he was working on it in the last years and where he wants to go in the following years. And then on Thursday, the full day, the full expert training is only about ORDA, given by Jean-Pierre. Jean-Pierre will go in details and show you how to compare the old and the new way to do things. A full day only about ORDA. It's the biggest feature set we had in 30 years. So, long introduction. What is ORDA? O is for object. And you might think now, objects, I know it. Yeah, we added objects some years ago. As type in the language, with object field, and now even with object notation. It's a huge, a really important feature, but you see only the tip of the iceberg. So I hear some in the room, object language, we finally did it, object language. Yeah, the language will become much more object-oriented. But statement behind here, this is already possible with version 16R6. It's not yet ORDA. There's much more. O in ORDA is not just the object type. It is not only the object language. It's not even only an object database. Imagine you could use the whole database just like an object. DS is for data store. It represents the whole database. Employee is the name of a table. All is a way to access all records in this way. 0 is one of many ways to select one record of that selection. And first name is the name of a field. The language allows in a single line to express complex access of records, handling a database just like an object. The whole database becomes an object. Thanks. And even the reverse. So let's say you have an object, maybe JSON received from a REST request. What about to use an object as a database? The same syntax, same language, same commands? Use the database as an object, or use any object as a database. The R in ORDA is not for revolution, even it is one. It is for relational. We are all creating business applications, and for very good reasons, we are all using transactional, relational database systems. There were several object databases on the market, none very successful, as it is very hard to create a business application without relations. People try to use mappers named ORM, object relational mappers, to get a binding between object language and relational database. The result was poor performance and huge resource needs. Our strength is that we are an integrated system, database, language, user interface, all in one. And this allows us to access a new world. 4D allows to name a relation, and I assume most of you never cared so far. So previously, you could only use one relation between two tables. Let's say you have invoices and customers, and you need two different relations, shipping and invoicing. This was impossible in 4D so far. You could have two relations, but you could not control which one to use. But if you name a relation, and with the ORDA language, you can specify simply the name of relation, here shipping to, and city is the field in the related table, to specify where to search. And if you now say, this is a fake example, a real world example is much more complex, yes, of course. In the real world, you have invoices, customers, and addresses. You have 3 tables. So what? It's quite easy. You just write customer.shippingto.city. You can chain that. You can specify which relations to use over several tables. So easy. Still a single line of code. To make it even more complex, I cannot see it because everything is dark, but I can imagine nobody ever used recursive relations. When I detected them 30 years ago, it was awesome for me. I never saw something like that. And when I tried to use them, as soon as you tried to use it, you was losing your record. You could not really use recursive relations. So imagine you have one table, people, and you have 2 relations going to the same table, one named father and one named mother. And you want to use them. With dot syntax, it is so easy. ds people, query, and then simply by using the name of relation, father.father, I can find all people with a grandfather named John. A single line. Try to imagine to do that with SQL or even with 4D. You need code like that. And now it's so simple. Of course, all is about data. So let's talk about current record and current selection. For many years, this was the key feature in 4D. The current record makes everything so easy. It's easier to display and easier to work with data. 4D automatically handles everything. And similar for the current selection. So easy and so convenient. Just one issue. There's only one current record. So the hassle was always how to get data from 2 different records at the same time. So now imagine you have an unlimited number of current records, an unlimited number of current selections in a single process at the same time. As easy as before, just unlimited. In the slide before, we queried, but we didn't really use the result. So the first line returns us not a copy of data. It's not an array with data. It is a collection of record references. And we can use this variable anywhere we want in our code, like to use the result and now to order it. And you can use as many results, meaning as many selections, or as many records as you have local variables, unlimited. ORDA integrates the object access inside the system. It's everywhere. You can use order in the language, or of course in forms. Even in a Listbox, you can simply assign the result we just did, the result of a query, as a collection to a Listbox, and then use it. The data could come from the result of a query from your local database, or from the result from a received JSON answer from another database system. It's the same code, the same form, could be used for data from different sources. No code modification, no new testing. ORDA is much more than a language. It will change the way you handle or display data. It will change the way you work with data. But don't worry, all your existing code will continue to work. We will continue to support the old language concept. Everything just works as before. You can choose the old way or ORDA. And even better, you can mix both. Start new projects or models with ORDA while keeping the existing code unchanged. But still, there's a major impact for you. If you're looking for new developers, you will feel very different when you present your source code and your development team. Because when you have a very modern concept with technology not available elsewhere, it will make recruitment much easier for you. And of course, the same for us. When we are talking to new customers, it's a very different thing with a very modern approach and a unique way to allow object-oriented usage of a relational database. As a recap, some direct benefit for you. You get optimistic or pessimistic logging, whatever you want, for every single record you choose. This allows larger installations, easier coding. You get automatic unloading of record, no need to make reduced selection anymore. Why? Quite easy. As you saw, the result of a query, if it's a selection or a record, the reference is a local variable. If a variable is not existing anymore, automatically unloaded. Developer cannot forget it, no need for testing. And as we have as many current records and current selections as we want, in parallel, no need anymore to use SQL or push and pop record just to avoid to lose the current record. This was just a little peek. Laurent will go after the coffee break much more in the detail. So it's not giving you a training how to use ORDA, but he will show you what you can do with it, give you ideas what is possible, and why he designed it that way. If you cannot follow everything, don't worry. This is a completely new way. It will keep us busy for the following years. And we'll fill a lot of breakout sessions in the following summits. But it gives you an idea about the power we provide with ORDA. And Jean-Pierre will spend all day on Thursday to teach about the details. So if you did not sign in yet, we have salespeople outside. You're welcome to share on Saturday. Everything what I talked about so far is in version 17, going better very soon. And Laurent will show you a little bit more, as usual. He will go 17R, maybe even up to 18, to tell you where we want to go in the future. Last for the summit, we gave a commitment that we believe in the 40 language, and we will continue to improve it. And most of you expected some small changes here and there. And if it's just so, and you will see much more in the MasterClass, we drastically enhance the language. And this will have major impact on how you will write code in the future, being more efficient, coding faster, and you can produce user interfaces impossible before.
An introduction to ORDA was made by Thomas, so you have an idea of what it is. When we started that, the idea was really to allow manipulating business logic through objects and relation being part of that logic. So the database structure is still very important for your data, and the way you will manipulate your data through object is based on the way you design your structure. So it's still true that way. An object, what is an object? It's just a kind of collection, or not a collection because we use collection, but it's a series of key values, and you could consider a record as being an object. You know, you have the attribute, the field, and the value of the field, and so on. So we push that logic to everything, and you will see that in the demonstration here. Basically, we have tables. So a table is a table of records. So each table, we call it a data class. So in object programming, a class is the definition of the model of an object. So, and data, because it's persistent, you can actually store that object to disk. So we call the instances of a data class the entities. So they are record, the equivalent of records. So here is a small database here with an employee table, company table. So that will relate to being a data class with the ORDA logic, data class employee, data class company. And here I have different fields. They will be called attributes. But an attribute is more than just a simple field. For example, between employee and company, I have a relation. So here is my foreign key, my primary key for company. And that relation, I gave it a name. So the name for that relation here is employer from N to 1, and a company has many employees. So those relation names will appear in your data class as being also attributes. They will be accessible as, and an attribute named employer will exist and will allow you to manipulate the company directly from the employee. And same thing, an attribute named employees will exist and will allow you to manipulate a selection of employees from your company directly. Same thing with that relation here, which is a bit more complex usually to manipulate with the classic way in 4D language. I have a foreign key manager ID which relates to a primary key which is also an employee. So I called it manager, and the one-to-N relation is called direct reports. So now I can manipulate those data. So let's try with a very simple example here. For example, I want to get to load an entity, so a record, from the employee table, so from the employee data class, whose primary key is 5. Okay, so I can just do that. So let's run it actually, it will be easier. So when I do that, E is an object, and it's also an entity, so it's a subclass of an object called entity, and E is directly usable. So if I expand it, I can see the attribute of E, sorry. So I have the birthday, so all the fields from my table, first name, last name, and so on. And for example, I have the employer, which is the attribute mapping the name of the relation. So employer itself is an entity whose primary key is 2 from the company table. So if I open it, I can see the company here and so on. And as mentioned, company itself has the one-to-N relation, which is employees. So I can expand it and I can see the list of all employees for that company. So as you can see, you manipulate data in an object way easily. So for example, if I want the company for that employee, I just do that and I get it now in a local variable there, which is a company. If I want the name of the company, I can directly do something like this and I get the name of the company. If I want the manager, same thing, manager is a related entity, it's another employee, and I can directly get the manager of somebody that way. So it's easier to manipulate your data. I can get a second entity in memory from employees, so now I have $E and $E1 being 2 entities, so the equivalent of 2 current records, the classic way of programming. And what is important is that you can mix classic way and new way of programming without any problem. For example, if I look at my table and fields from employees, so here I have 0 employee in the current selection of employee. I can do all records, so I have my 150,000 records selected, but it doesn't alter my entities and so on. And I can even now load another entity, for example, whose primary key is 7, and it doesn't change my current selection. So you can mix both, work together. So it's a way to do the integration of new programming very smoothly. You don't break.
Nice.
Let's go back to simple things, and let's start with a simple form. So it's good to have entities and manipulate this, but you want to be able to display, edit them, and so on in forms. And so one simple way to do it would be something like this. I will have so let's look at the form method first. In my onload method, I will have a global variable. But yes, now I will have a global variable. We'll see how to avoid that later, but a process. Okay, and I want that entity to be the first of all my employees. Okay, so here DS is my data store, so it's the database. As you will see, you can manipulate several databases at the same time. In the first release, in version 17, you will only have access to DS, so only one, your main database. But later on, I will show you, we'll be able to open several data stores together and manipulate them, local or remote data stores. So here I take I create a selection of all employees from that data class, and I take the first one. And here I can just say I want to see amp.id, amp.firstname, last name, and salary directly. And in my previous and next button, I have a member function. So being an entity means you can also have access to special function related to that entity. That's part of the object programming where you have member function. So previous is a member function which returns the previous one in the selection the entity was taken off. Here it was taken off all record. So, and being the first in the beginning, of course, previous will be null because there's no previous than the first, but later on it may change. And so if it's not null, then I will put into my global variable amp the previous amp. And in doing so, it will automatically update my input widgets because the amp variable has changed. So, and something for next, I do it with next. So if I run this, does something like this, and I can do next, 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 previous, previous. Okay. Just so simple code to manipulate your data with an entity. Nothing very fancy, but as I mentioned, it's not very good to use process variable when you can avoid process variables. So let's use form variables. So I don't know if many of you already have seen the form method, and I'll explain it very quickly. Okay, so there is a form function which returns a reference to the object that is associated with the form you're currently running. So in the beginning, if you don't do anything, that object is empty, but you can put as many properties as you want in that object, and they can be considered as form variables because they're properties, and you have an unlimited number of properties you can put in an object. So form always references the object, the form you're associated with the form you're running. So here I'll put in form.amp the same thing that I did with the global variable amp. Nothing different, except that now I use form.amp_id for .amp first name and so on. It's just longer to write. It doesn't seem that interesting right now, but so, and if I run it, it runs, oh, let me get rid of this. It runs exactly the same way, so next, 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 previous, and so on. So, except that now I'm not using a global variable anymore, and so if I do a bit of code like this, where I open, so you already know the dialogue with the star at the end. When you use the star at the end, that means that the dialogue usually is used as a palette, a small window where you want that you get back control in your code running. That dialogue is here, and you can send event and so on. So here, this is exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to open 4 times the same window, sorry, not the same window, a window, but with that dialogue. And at the end, I will open the 5th one without the star, so I get control. So if I do this, I now have 5 different windows that are all running in the same process, so I don't need multiple processes, so it takes much less stack space on the server and so on if you're in client server, and they are all independent, they all have their variable, their form variables through form.amp, which are independent. So it's a nice way to manipulate entities that way. I mean, you don't have to always go through a global variable, process variable. So we mentioned that you can have multiple entities in the same process from the same table at the same time, and you can actually use that. So let's show a small example. Here, form method. Here in the onload, I take the first of all employee, I put it in amp, and same thing in amp2, in form.amp, for.amp2. Okay, and previous and next do like they did before, except that this one works on amp2 and this one on amp. And I've written a small method called compare salary. So compare salary gets two parameters, and those parameters are entities. So now you can, because they are objects, you can send them as parameters to your method. The good way is that when they are being sent that way, they are being sent as references, so it's very fast. And it's an easy way to manipulate your data in sub-methods and so on without having to take care of everything else, keeping track of the primary key and reloading the record and so on. No, it's there, you have your entity, it's there, and you can directly use it. So that compare salary accepts two parameters, first one being an entity, second one being an entity also, an employee. And I will compare the salary of both entities at the same time in memory, and if it's greater, I will say that one earns more or earns less than one, and I put that with a span style in my multi-style text to show the color green or red depending of if it's less or less than the previous one. So here I just have to use compare salary with form.amp and for.amp2, which are the variables that are being manipulated here. So if I run this with only a few pieces of code, I can do that. If I move, you can see that whenever this is bigger here, it gets green and so on. And the good part is, the good part is that it is because this is an expression that is computed whenever it's necessary. If I change the value here, it automatically recomputes here also, you see. So it makes it much easier to think. We tried to push the MVC model, model view controller, where actually you have your view. The controller is actually being called here whenever you need to run it and so on. So it makes it very easy to manipulate stuff. Now, here I was only showing one entity at a time. Let's manipulate a selection of entity, and we'll use Listbox for that. So, very briefly, in my form method, here's what I do. I now have the form.amps, so I put an S because it will be a selection of employees, and which will start being all employees. Okay, so I get that in my entity selections, and I keep it in my form. And here, in my Listbox, I said that Listbox is, as a data source, is a a collection, so it works either on a simple collection in memory or an entity selection of entities from disk. And so the source is form.amps, so my collection, and that's it. That's all I need to do, except that also, because it's a Listbox, I want to be able to click on a row. And each time I click on a row, it will select an item, and that item will become the current item. So I want that the current item to be referenced automatically into another variable called form.amp without the S. So the same form.amp you saw before. So here I will show form.amp.id, first name, last name, and salary. So if I run this, here is my selection, my entity selection. So it's a list box of, and whenever I click, it automatically updates the value. I don't need special code for this because it's related to the fact that it has changed and so on. So it's if I modify here and do something like this, it auto updates here and so on. That's part of the deal. So it's simple. You can manipulate your data that way with list boxes, and as mentioned, you can have multiple current record or entities at the same time. You can also have multiple entity selection for the same table, the same data class in the same process. So let's show it with here exactly the same thing, except that in my form method. So let's try to do something a little more complex. So in form.amps, I'll put ds.employee.query. So this time I will do, instead of all, I'll put a query of every employee whose first name starts with an A, and same thing in M2 starting with a B. And here I just choose this one to be form.amps and this one to be form.m2, and same thing for the current item. So if I run this and I click here, and you can see they're both working on different selection at the same time and so on. And same thing, I could use the expression that I was using here. So I could copy that and paste it somewhere here. So that's the good part of using form variables and so on. Here, I have an expression which compares the salary. I give those two parameters. In the previous form, they were used through the next, previous. Here, they will be selected through the action of clicking, but the code will run the same, except that you will see an error in the beginning, and I will explain why. So here I have an error because there's no current item, so it's null. So I cannot compare null, and I get an error. But so let's select a few of them, and now it works. So of course, we could have done something. I was lazy because it was part of a quick demonstration, but usually you would check if it's null, and if it's null, you would not display the error message. You would return an empty string or saying select something first or whatever. But as you can see, you can reuse piece of code very easily without having to change a lot of things and so on. Let me close a few forms. Okay, now a bit more complex. Not that complex, but just a bit more complex. So I've mentioned that when you have the current item, you can display the current item here. So first, I'll show you the form here. So same thing, I select all employee first, but I want also to be able to search in my employees to find something. So I created a text form variable, or I initialize it to empty, an empty string. And here it is. And in the code here, I do the following. I can either be editing it, or I could tab out, and so it could be either on an after keystroke, or anything else could be like a data change and so on. So I will. So in that case, I take the edited text, or I directly take the value of the variable that has been changed on the data change, and I want to search for those employees. So I will do in my selection a query. I will return a selection based on the query where first name is equal to a parameter or last name equal to the same parameter, and that parameter being the text that is here plus the wildcard, the @ sign. So by just doing so, I changed the container, the content of my attribute amps, form.amps, and because it has changed, it will automatically redraw, because the Listbox knows it has changed and it will redraw. And to finish, here in that Listbox, I have the current item, but I also want to keep track of all the selected items if I have several ones selected, if I have a multiple selection. So I will put them in form.selectedAmps. So form.selectedAmps will also be an entity selection. It will be an entity selection based on the selection of my employee here. And because it's an entity selection, I can use it as a data source for a Listbox. So I just duplicated my Listbox here and changed the source to be selected amps. So if we look at this running, it does something like this. If I click here and like this, you see they are automatically the selected amps, and I don't have much code to change to do that. It's automatic. If I type something like here, for example, CH, it finds everybody whose last name is CH or first name is CH. See, automatically, so it's quite fast. It's a small database here. It's only 150,000 records, but just to show the idea and so on. So I'll quickly go through a few examples of code, more complex example of code. I will not go into full detail, but just to have an idea. So I already mentioned, so you can do a get to load an entity with the primary key. There are many ways you can load an entity, but this is an example here. For example, I want from that employee to get the employer, the manager of the manager directly. I want to do queries where, for example, I want to find every employee working for Apple. So I can say employer.name is equal Apple. Internally, it will do a join based on the foreign key of employer ID and the primary key of ID in the company table. And if you use the query plan, it will show you that join in the query plan. I have an example with a form where I show everything. So I'm not going into detail here. I will show you later this. For example, people working for a manager. So everybody working for Brenda Smith. And so I can say manager.firstname equal Brenda, manager.lastname equal Smith. And this does a recursive relation and a join based on a recursive relation. Or everybody working for somebody working for Brenda Smith, so manager.manager first name equal Brenda and so on. It does also the join at several levels and so on. Another example, interesting example. For example, I want to find the coworker of somebody. So that somebody being in $amp, I can get his manager, and from that manager I can get the direct reports. So that returns me a selection of employees, included myself, included $amp, and that's why I do minus $amp, minus being a member function on an entity selection that get rid of, do the difference with an entity or an entity selection. In that case, it's an entity. For example, once I've done something like this, I can do much more interesting stuff. For example, here, exactly the same thing. So this will return an entity selection. Because it's an entity selection, I can project the first name attribute that will create a collection, so an array of string, which will contain the first name. And based on that, I do a join. Join is a member function on collection that creates a string which is composed of all the values of the collection separated by what I choose. So if I do something like this, let's try it, that will be actually. So let me just copy this first to show you this. Oh, yeah. So this will right away create a collection. You see, it creates a collection of all the first name of my entity selection. Now, if I run $text here, it is being shown as a list, as a string with separated by the comma and the space. I can do code like this also, where I want to find all coworkers which are earning, more than the average. So I have my coworkers, which were here, my selection of coworkers. On that selection, I can do a subquery, so a query whose salary is greater than the coworkers' average on the salary. You see, so you can do really nice stuff easily with, and that returns another selection I call lucky ones. And so very, very quickly here, because I will show that later on, but on the selection, you can do a lot of things. So you can do and, or, so they could either be inside your query, but sometimes you want to do it later on. So you can have two selections and renew do a diff or an and or between them and later on. You can manipulate each element of a collection or an entity selection through the for each keyword, where you actually, for example, here I want to do the sum of all the salary of a selection of employee, so I can do for each employee in my selection, and sum is equal to sum of plus $amp salary. And $amp is a variable that is going to be modified for each iteration with the value of the employee in that selection. Of course, this could have been done like this. This is just to show the for each. But if I want to increase the salary of all people named Kathy by 5%, I can do something like this for each $amp. So here it could be an expression because it will be computed once. So I will say on a query of people whose first name is Kathy, and then I change the salary and I save my entity, and that's it, and for each. So those kind of code you can do easily. Let me, okay, I'm on time. Okay, so when I showed the Listbox, I intentionally didn't show what was in the columns, but it was quite obvious. You had this ID, this first name, and so on. Actually, what is it exactly? When you have a Listbox on a collection or of object or an entity selection, while being displayed, for each line being displayed, there is a variable that is the item being displayed, and it's returned by this. This will be a reference to the object being displayed in the Listbox. So here I can choose this.id, and it will give me the ID attribute of the item being displayed. But it could be any expression actually here. So for example, here I can have an expression like this, where I can put this.manager.firstname plus a space plus this manager.last name. And the manager being a recursive link to another employee. No problem. It can be handled without any. Same thing here, I can put this.employer.name to get the name of the company the employee works for. So if I run something like this, I get the manager. Here I don't have any manager because this is the president, but everybody else has a manager, and I can see the stuff and so on. So it makes it. And as you can see, each time it's being displayed, it automatically activates the relation to get the related manager and the company. So, and this is just a laptop. Okay, but a powerful laptop. But still. Okay, so now in that example, I build a few more things. So I want to see how many entities are selected. So I could just do an expression like this, form.amps, so amps being the selection, the entity selection, dot length. So length is a special attribute for entity selection, which returns the size, the number of elements, like size of array for an array. So it works on entity selection and collection. So I get the length, which is the number. So I just need to do that, and that's it. It will be automatically updated each time my selection changes. I don't have to have some code to update my variable and so on. And here I want to show a few queries. So what I did is the following. In the code here, I put in form.vQuery, which is being shown here as a variable, some text. And I will execute that text later on. So here, for example, I put a query to show a few examples of query. And execquery does the following stuff. It will create a setting object where the query plan is true. So when I do a query, I can put optional parameters through the setting object, so or whatever the name. So here I will do a query on form.vQuery, so what is being used here, with the settings query plan true. So it will do the selection, create the entity selection written here, and in that entity selection I will not only have the entities, but also a query plan as a property, as an attribute of, as a property of my selection. So I can display that query plan here in form.amps.queryPlan. So that way, with only 4 lines of code, I can see what my query will look like and explain you this. So query plan is quite useful to understand the way ORDA maps relational queries to object queries to relational queries. So let's run this. So the first one you've seen is quite simple, just to show. So for first name, start with A and ID and so on. And internally, the query plan is an index on first name, like A and the wildcard, and between 50 and 5,000 for the ID. So query 2 is the same one, but I can, in my query, I can directly put a sort command, so order by last name, and I actually get the stuff sorted. And query 3 is a bit more interesting. I want to look for employer.name, start with A. So as you can see, the employer is here, so I have all the A. And internally, you have to read from bottom to top and from inside to outside, because it's, so it will do an index search on company name, starting with A, and then it will do a join between the foreign key employer ID and the primary key company ID to get all the employees matching a join. So it's simple, but for me it's easier to write that way than always have to do the join and so on. Same thing, but with the manager, which is a recursive relation. So here, internally, it creates a virtual instance of the table that is being called employee1. There is a query on employee1 first name and employee1 last name, starting with A. And then there's a join between employee1 ID, so the primary key, and the foreign key, which is manager ID for employee. And at the end, I get employees, so I get my selection of employees. So it has, for people that are used to SQL, it's like creating an alias in SQL where you have an alias to the same table, and so, but it does this automatically for you. You just have to think in terms of object, and it matches automatically. And same thing at the second, oh, there it is, at the second level. So manager.manager.first name. So everybody working for a manager whose manager has a first name starting with A and last name starting with A, which is quite a very clever way of working, but actually, and so it does the join on two levels automatically for you. And you can see it's still very fast, and it has found 329 entities automatically. And you can have many queries, like here's a last example where you can do in, for example, so working with arrays or collection. For example, I want everybody whose first name is in a collection of 3 possible name, Kathy, Fabrice, and Dario, and so on. And it does the stuff automatically. And so, and here I can put whatever I want in my query, and you see, because it will be automatically handled on the unchanged, so last name equal P. And does the stuff. And from, so that's the idea where you manipulate the entity selection really as, you could consider it as arrays of references to record, actually. This is what it is internally, kind of. And you can easily manipulate them, do whatever you want, expand them, and display them, of course. So in that example, still the same, I would like to be able to easily display people who are manager and people who are not. So being a manager means that your list of direct report is not empty. So that means that the selection length is not equal to 0. So I did a small function called color code, and I'll explain this. So when you execute when you display the form, the listbox, every entity being displayed is in this. And it's true for each column, but it's true also for expression you can give for that form. So here, sorry, I click on the wrong one. For that listbox, have somewhere, if I can find it, I don't know where it is, font expression, font color and font color expression. Yeah, it is. You can have a font color expression. That expression is any 4D code you write, so it could be a call to a method, it could be a simple expression, whatever you want, and it returns a value. That value is going to be used in that case, because it's font color, as the color of the line being displayed, or actually of the text being displayed. So I can return red in some case and green in some other case. So this is what I do in my, so let me just put it there. So I'll call color code. Okay. So color code will return a number, and that number is going to be used as the color to display. And here is the color code function. So this is still valid in that expression. So this is my entity being displayed. If the direct report length is 0, that means I have no direct report, so I'm not a manager, so I return green in $0, else I return red. Very simple. And that's it. So if I run this again, now I can see the manager in red and the other employees in green automatically with just a simple, and each time it's being displayed, it does also now a join to find all the direct reports, which are the related entities automatically. Okay. Now, so up to now, everything I've shown is will be in version 17. I'm going to show you one small thing that is going to be in an R release just after 17. So I just copied and pasted the form, remember, with two entity selection, form.amps and for.amps2, and that's it. So it's the same one, and the code in the beginning is the same one, where I query everybody whose first name starts with N with me. Okay. But I would like to show you a few more things. So here in form.amps.to length, I showed the number of entities there because I'm going to be able to do a query. So here is my code here. I'm going to connect to a remote data store. Actually, in my home in Paris, not in Paris, but near Paris, I created a small 4D server that I kept running, and I opened a port and I left it on. I hope my kid didn't play with my computer while I was on, because it will not work. But so. It's a slow connection, 5 megabits connection, and we're going to go through Wi-Fi here. So you will see still how it behaves. That's the power of ORDA. No. Okay. So I'll go quickly because I only have 10 minutes left, but very quickly. So here's what I do. I create a connection object whose type is 4D server. There are many type of connection you will be connected to, but in the first R release it will be 4D server and Wakanda only. So here's 4D server. Then the host name, I'm supposed also to have a username and everything else, a password, but here I chose it to be open for the demo, so just this. And I open the data store that way. So I do open data store with the connection parameter, and I give it a local identifier, so that if I reopen the same one again and again, it will not always reopen, it will use that local identifier too. And it returns a data store object, like DS before, but instead of being my main database, it's a remote database called here $remote store. It's kept in a local variable. It's that simple. And, and now, instead of doing ds.employee.query, I just do remote store.employee.query. You know, so ds being a data store like any other, I can use any kind of data store to do that. So I will find every employee from that remote store whose first name starts with a C. So that means that that remote store has the same kind of data classes. It has because else I would not be able to use employee, of course. So for the purpose of my demonstration, I use the same name. But you can have different names and whatever, because here I put that into the same variable, M2, and now in my Listbox, because in my Listbox I just said I want to reference this, it doesn't care if it's local, global, or whatever, remote, it works. So that's it. I'll try it. And it will work, even though it's on a slow connection. So here is my local data. Now I do the switch. And now it's, as you can see, there are many more records because there are 1,005,000. And now you see it's a bit slower, but it's through the... And we'll show a few more things here. For example, the query itself. So on the data change event for the vQuery, I will do a form remote store employee.query with the text I'm entering into form vQuery, so that we can do queries on the remote store. So if I run it again, it's there. So I will just say, for example, first name equal A. So remember here I did first name equal A, but on my local data store. Here I will do first name equal A on my remote data store, which is a bit bigger. So it has found 150,000 and at home, and here they are being displayed and so on. So it's quite fun. So I don't know if we have a bit more time. Okay. So I will show you a few things. ORDA, as you've seen, there's the term object in ORDA. So it works for the database itself and so on, but you can also manipulate object in memory as data in an easy way. So let me show an example. It will be easier to show actually. In my database here I have a journal, a log file, and I want to be able to display it. So here is what I did. In the form method, in the unload, I get a reference to my 4D folder, and inside my 4D folder, I exported my journal as in JSON earlier. I already did, so that's why it's false here, because I already did. Is what I did. First I deleted the content to be sure, and I did a log file to JSON. Okay, so log file to JSON creates a log file of all the. It does. I will not show you here, but it's easy. It returns all the log entries and I do a text. I get a text from that document, and I pass it into log entries. So log entries will be a collection of objects, which contains the log entries. And I keep this for later. I keep also all log entries being equal to log entries in the beginning. So I do that because I will do queries and I will change log entries, and I want to be able to always keep all log entries. So if I run this, actually the best way is to show you what's going on. if I run this, okay, form.log entries here, is a collection of objects which contains the operation, you know, so the operation name, safe sequence number, operation number, the type, the sequence number, the table ID, table name, and so on. So this is what you get in the log. So it's an array, it has been passed from disk and so on. And I want to be able to display that. So to display it, here's what I did. I put this dot operation number, this dot operation name, this, and in my Listbox, I just chose the form.log entries to be used to display my data. So this, in that case, is one entry at a time being displayed. And so I can do something like this, timestamp, table name. And I want also to see, when you modify or save a record, you can choose, when you generate the log, the JSON file from the log, you can choose to get the fields. So fields is an object which contains the field name and the value of the field. So for example, if I modify the first name, I will have first name and the value. And I want to be able to show all the fields directly in my box. So I created a small method here called showFields, which will get in $1 a parameter which will be the fields. Okay? And field is an object. On an object, I can get the values. So it returns only the values, so not the properties, but the values. It returns a collection of values. I do a join separated by a comma, comma and a space, and automatically they will be displayed here in my, somewhere, I don't know where. I lost my window. So you see, whenever there is a field, they're being displayed. So here is my log file. And now on that log file, I want to search. Keep in mind, this is just an array in memory. It's a collection of objects, so I want to search in that collection of arrays. So I can use the following code. Form log entries is equal to form all log entries, which I kept earlier, query, and with the form vQuery, which is the string I give here. So that way, I can do queries on my array very easily. So, for example, I want to find every query whose operation and start with create, and I can all the create records, create context, and so on. So, and I can do whatever I want. And here I'm searching in memory in my array of objects, in my collection of objects. So it makes it so. Do we still have a bit more time? They tell me it's 2 minutes. 2 minutes. I'll do it very quickly. Just okay. Okay. So I mentioned. So the Listbox, you have the ability to display what is being currently displayed, but selected, but sometimes you want to do it when you move the mouse over stuff easily. So the good part is that instead of having to calculate which position it's in and so on, if you work with object, you would like to be able just to know which object is being currently over, you know. So here's the following code. If I'm on the Listbox, so if it's on mouse enter or mouse move, and if I use the shift down, I will do a get mouse to get the coordinate, and I will use a new command which will not be in 17 but in 17R something, where I return an object which gives me a lot of information on where the mouse is currently at. And it returns a lot of things. many things, but here I'm just going to use the element, so the element being over. So, and I'll put it in form.over. That's it. So form.over, I could use here to show form.over.firstName because the element is itself an entity because it's an entity selection. That's it. And I could also use that here. Sorry. Where I could choose to display form.over.directReports. So I will have, when I move the mouse over somebody, have a list of direct reports being displayed in another Listbox automatically. So I'll show you this. So I don't press Shift, nothing happens. I use Shift and they're being displayed in real time, you see, with only a few lines of code and so on. So it may, and of course, you could do even a bit nicer. Or, for example, let me paste and explain. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. If I press the Control key, I want to do the same thing, so get what current element is being over, but also I want to check, I want to display the listbox under that element. So I can get also in $info the cell rectangle, and I'm going to use this to get the left part and the bottom part of the cell being over, and change the color to a very nice pinky stuff, and you'll see the element. So, and I'll change the object called tips color and and coordinates. So the tips is there. That is that listbox. So if I run it again with that code, now if I press Control, I get something like this. You see, that's it. It's with only one last. So, yeah, ORDA is so working with object in memory collection. So it's also working with different stuff that are not necessarily data from the database or in memory. For example, when you manipulate document on disk, files and folders. With ORDA, you will have the ability to manipulate file objects and folder objects. And here's very, very quickly, so I will not go into full detail here, but here's what I'm going to explain. In the onload, I'm going to get, so folder is a new command that returns a folder object based on a string, which is the property path, the folder path. So here I'm going to use the folder path of the 4D folder database folder. Okay, so, and I want this to be a native path. You can work in POSIX also. So I'll put that into my current folder, into my form space. Okay, and I want a collection of documents, so docs, which will be my current folder folders. So folders is a property of a folder which returns a collection of folders. And files is a property of a folder which returns a collection of files. So for one folder, you get all files and folder. And I'm going to concatenate them into a new collection of documents. I call it documents. So in documents, I will have a collection of stuff which are either files or folders. And form docs is going to be the source for my listbox here. Sorry, I clicked twice again. So form docs, so that each time I will display this, which will be a document which has a full, a full name, an icon, a size, and a modification date. And when I click, I select, I will have I will change form.selectedDoc. And the reason I do that is that when you click now here, so on click, I take selected doc. If it's not no, and if it is a folder, then I will take the folders of that selected document, which is itself a folder, plus the files, and I put that into docs, which is my main Listbox. So it will go one level deep. And if I run this, and it automatically displays my folder and so on. If I click, it automatically and so on. And up does the same thing. It takes the parent folder and so on. So with only a few lines of code, you can manipulate easily objects, you know, through your Listbox, which are, and here what is interesting is that in my Listbox, I just use this. So it could be a collection of objects which are not file and folder, but which have the same property, and it would work, which is important, so you can copy your information. For example, you can do a Listbox which works on an entity selection and use the same Listbox to work on a collection of objects which are the copy of your entity selection taken from your server into local variables as a local collection. So you work the same way, so you can have data being manipulated the same way.